the lunch and we'll start at 12:15.
Von den Taxifahrern erfährt man am meisten.
Who? Yep. Who's the number? Okay, it's not this.
My name is Schnoell. I serve here in Chicago as Consul General since January 2010. Normally we have a term of 4 years. So yeah, you know, in the first year we try to get used to our job. The second and third year we try to be really operational. This is this time now, this part. And the fourth year, yeah, we prepare already the departure more or less. So I'm not there. So to today's issue, the future of Europe, I will try to limit myself to some thoughts, some ideas, because the question and answer session is perhaps more important. I thought when I looked through at the participants of today's panel, I realized that I am the only representative of a smaller country. So we have here representatives of the most influential countries of the European Union. I think looking at the Euro crisis during the last month and during the last years, I had the impression that sometimes the smaller member states had the impression that their voice was not taken into consideration. And therefore, thank you to the Niagara Foundation, who are fully aware what it means to have also smaller member states on board. And one of the principles of the European Union was always unity in diversity. This should not only be respected in a cultural sense, but I think also when it comes to the relationship between bigger and smaller states. At the same time, resolving the current crisis, we are fully aware that it needs the impetus of bigger countries, it needs the impetus of the German Franco engine to bring the train again on the track. So we are fully aware of that, so this is a balancing act. But this only to the contributors of the panel today. I also would like to make a sort of link, starting, but not going into details, with the structure of the European Union, which is so difficult that even insiders don't understand it fully. And then from the principle of shared sovereignty to the economic crisis, to the debt crisis we face today, and then draw some conclusions. I think there is an overall substantial link in these several aspects. So first of all, the European Union, what it is about. I think we all agreed during the integration process that today we face simply transnational challenges like terrorism, like non-proliferation, like global warming. And I think the answer is, and all the member states of the European Union and future member states of the European Union are aware of that we need a sort of transnational governance also. And this is, from a political background, everything what it is about when it comes to the whole European integration process. Solve transnational cross-border problems within transnational governance. So now I could speak about the legal structure of the European Union with all its institutions, etc. But I realized even in Europe, as I said, it's extremely hard to understand that and to bring that over, as we say in German. So I want to limit myself on two main issues. The first one is the principle of sovereignty, which makes already a difference, or which makes the European Union already different to other international organizations. Sovereignty means in the end, and I realized that when I served in Brussels for 4 years, it means that binding rules can be adopted, and these binding rules, in an extreme case, can also implement it in the member states of the European Union against their will by European institutions. So it's not a loose confederation of member states, but there's really a sort of rules for implementing community rules in the member states of the European Union. And to give you an example, there are statistics today that 70% of the rules and of the acquis, or let's say of national rules, go back to community rules. So everything what national parliaments adopt are the result of EU rules, of European Union rules, which have been adopted in Brussels. So this is really an important aspect in our everyday political life at the national level. So sovereignty, the second point, and I think this is also open to a discussion perhaps, I would give the European Union, because of its internal market and its common currency, the euro, a sort of status of a quasi-state. We have a single market where people, where capital, where products can move freely, and we also have a common currency. So admittedly only among 17 member states, but this of course affects the whole European Union. And with these two elements, sovereignty and this sort of quasi-status as a state, I come to this principle of shared sovereignty. So some competences are on the European Union level, other competences stay on the state level, on the national state level, on the level of European Union member states. And there I'm now, for me, in the middle of the debt crisis of the economic crisis. Because we started with the process, we have a monetary union, and at the same time a competence which is at EU level, at European Central Bank level, but we have forgotten, if I may say so, or we have not accompanied this whole monetary process during the last 12, 15 years with the necessary fiscal, with the necessary economic, and with the necessary political process. This was not embedded in this context. And I think today we have to ask ourselves, how far do we want to go to overcome these shortcomings? So do we want to have a banking union? First proposals are on the table, for example, with a supervision for the banks within the Eurozone and also within the European Union. Do we want a fiscal union, which would foresee a common finance minister, common taxes, common debt mutualization, an issue which is controversially discussed in Germany also. Economic union, do we want to have common labor laws, for example? Do we want to have social laws when it comes to pension system, common pension system, unemployment systems? So these are perhaps questions which will not be answered overnight, but we have to take first steps, and it has to be clear where we in principle want to go. And all that, this is my fourth point, after the fiscal, the economic and the banking union, what about the political union? We saw with the measures which have taken so far already, European Stability Mechanism, Fiscal Compact, we saw that these were mainly decisions which have been taken behind closed doors between 27 member states, head of states and government, and no democratic legitimization. So what will happen in future? What will be the role of the European Parliament? What will be the role of the national parliaments? Do we want, and this was also discussed recently, that the President of the European Commission will be the result of parliamentary elections? Or do we still nominate the European or the President of the European Commission by the member states or by the heads of state and government? So these are questions where we should think about it and where we will have to find answers. This is only a small, perhaps three short conclusions after what I said. For me, the first question is, is a question of political will and political commitment, as I said. Meaning, do we stick to the Eurozone as it is at the moment, and do we want to avoid a breakup of the Union, and in general, do we want go further on the path of the integration process? If we answer this question with yes, I come to a more technical level. Then we need a roadmap with concrete steps and with a concrete time frame. It is clear that some elements have to be answered immediately, others are not for tomorrow, are not for after tomorrow, but at least we should not lose sight of it. And the third element is for me that we are running out of time, that we should not lose time. The European Central Bank, with its decision, has stabilized the situation, perhaps, with the acquisition of government bonds, which was promised, if I may say so, by the President of the European Central Bank. But this does not mean that the politicians, the political leaders of the European Union can sit back idly and wait for further actions on a monetary level. Thanks. I hope I was not too long.
I'm Robert Dickson. I'm the British Consul General here in Chicago. I've just got really 4 things I'd like to say. As a sort of preamble to that, I'd like to say thank you very much to the Niagara Foundation. I've spoken here before. It's a tremendously, I think it's a great civic contribution that you make in enabling people to get together to discuss topical issues of the day. And in a way, although of course, there's lots of issues within the US we're focusing on at the moment with the elections and all the other things that are going on here. I'm very struck as I go around the Midwest. I cover 13 states from Chicago, and I'm struck even, a long way into the center of America. I get asked questions nearly all the time about the Eurozone and what's going on in Europe. So I think even though we may feel a long way from Europe here in the Midwest, actually, the nature of a globalized world means that what happens in Europe is of real importance to people here, and it's great that you're providing a forum for us to discuss these things. As I said, I've just got 4 very sort of simple points I'd like to put on the table, really, and then I hope those will serve as a basis for discussion, because the future of Europe is an issue that you could discuss for many days and nights without coming to any firm conclusions, so I'll try and keep this bit brief. The first point is a point I should make, really, I think, as the British Consul General, which is that there's sometimes misapprehension about the role of Britain in the European Union. We're not in the Eurozone, we're not in the 17 members of the Eurozone, but we are very much a leading member among the 27 members of the European Union. And it's worth saying, I think, on the record at the very beginning, that we are absolutely committed. The current British government, like previous British governments, is absolutely committed to playing a leading role in the European Union, even though we are not, and I think it's very unlikely we ever will be part of the Eurozone. The second thing I think to say about the future of Europe is that Europe clearly faces a very immediate and acute crisis in the form of the Eurozone. And I think if you look at what's happening there are 3 quite important steps that have been taken this month. The announcement by Mario Draghi, the President of the European Central Bank, that there will be a bond buying programme. Secondly, the initiation of the European Stability Mechanism, and crucially, and I defer here to my German colleague, the decision of the German Constitutional Court not to impose any injunction on bills that will enable that to be put into practice. So we have, and the third thing is the proposals that Commissioner Barnier has published on banking union. So I think if you add those 3 things together, the bond buying programme, the stability mechanism, and the beginning of a banking union, then I think you start to see possibly the way in which Europe may be able to find a long-term solution to the ongoing rolling crisis that we've all lived with for the last 2 or 3 years with the Eurozone. One feels a little bit like what Churchill said after the Battle of Alamein, which is, we aren't at the end, we aren't even the beginning of the end, but we might be the end of the beginning. And I think in terms of the Eurozone, we perhaps are closer now to seeing a way in which mechanisms can be put in place which will enable the crisis in the Eurozone to be solved. And that we as Brits are not part of the Eurozone, but we are very directly affected by what happens in the Eurozone, so we very much welcome the actions that those in the Eurozone are taking to solve those crises. The third thing I'd like to say is that whatever happens in the Eurozone, it's quite clear that Europe is going to undergo a lot of structural change in the next decade. Sometimes it feels as if Europe does nothing except impose structural change on itself. And rather than go into the detail on that, I'd just make sort of 2 points, I think. The first is that what we already see in Europe is multiple forms of European Union membership. Thomas, I thought, put it quite nicely by using the phrase unity in diversity. And I think what we would see is Europe going forward not as something which imposes one set of rules in a uniform way on all of its members, but which, if you like, has a more sort of a la carte approach, which enables countries to opt into different parts of the European Union or to opt out in the way that best suits their national priorities and their national democratic interests. So without wanting to sort of say exactly how you might bring that about, we very much see that as the sort of template for European reform. The second thing I'd say is that we are very much in favour in the British government in further enlargement of the European Union. Clearly our hosts today have a strong Turkish connection, and I should just mention in this context that we are very strong supporters of Turkish membership of the European Union, which has been under discussion since 1963. We are very much in favour of Turkish accession negotiations being brought to an early and we hope successful conclusion. So we would like to see Turkey in the European Union. We think Turkey has a tremendous amount to offer the European Union, both in demonstrating that the European Union is truly inclusive and can include people with an Islamic tradition as well as a more Christian tradition. But also we think that Turkey today is a place of tremendous economic vitality, and if there's one thing that Europe needs at the moment, it's a bit of economic vitality. So we are strong supporters of Turkish membership. And the final thing I'd say, my fourth point really, is that we think that what Europe really needs to do is to recover its competitiveness, its ability to really compete and trade in the world. And we think that a very strong contribution to that would be made by a free trade agreement between the European Union and the United States. Whatever the travails of the Eurozone and whatever the sort of impact we see of rising powers in China and India and elsewhere in Asia, the fact is that the biggest trading relationship in the world today by far, and one of the most balanced, is the one between the European Union and the United States. And we are very, very much of the view that the remaining tariff and non-tariff barriers that impede that relationship, it would be a very good thing if we could have a European Union-US free trade agreement which would get rid of those barriers, and we think would have profoundly positive effects on the economies both of the United States and also of the European Union. So we hope that whatever the outcome of the election in November, we think that on both sides there is a very strong case for such an agreement, and we think that there is actually a real window of opportunity potentially for either a re-elected administration or a newly elected administration to take this forward with its European counterparts. So it's something that we will certainly be pursuing as a priority. So I hope those 4 points set out where we stand as the UK, what we think about the Eurozone and how that crisis might begin to be solved, the sort of Europe we want to see in the future, including one which is both open to different, to a flexible interpretation, but also includes Turkey as a member. And finally, the benefit that we would see in an FTA between the EU and the US.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the comments, for the invitation. My name is Helmut Rausch. I'm the Deputy Consul General here at the German Consulate in Chicago. It's my first stay in the United States, and when I arrived here 2 years ago, it's just started becoming interesting to deal with European and German matters, but this changed very much, as we can see today. The audience is a very big one today, which is a great pleasure for me. And I think the interest in European matters increased rapidly and will increase maybe even further in the future. I want to come to some remarks regarding the German position in this crisis, in this conflict. As you know, Germany is the biggest country in the European Union and the strongest economy at the same time, and as such the country plays a key role in solving this crisis. There's no doubt. Germany is aware of its burden and responsibilities. We believe that there are 3 key pillars to overcome the crisis, the financial and economic crisis: discipline and public spending, solidarity in Europe, and policies that promote growth. Not growth as a product of debt, but growth as a product of competitiveness, as my colleague to the left mentioned. At the same time, we have to strike a balance between solidarity and responsibility. It cannot be a one-way street. Just to say, no money without conditioning, or a hard expression, check against delivery. I hope you understand it right. What are Germany's goals? We want more Europe, not less. And when I say more Europe, I would like to say a better Europe. A better Europe as a long-term remedy for Europe. The present crisis management is necessary, but it will not protect Europe in the long term. The alternative would be to live forever from crisis to crisis, but who wants this? Only a more and a better Europe will prevent us from a similar or even worse crisis in the future. Let me say something about how Germany sees Europe's future. We think that only a closer political union, a more integrated Europe with more national powers passed to the European level, is the essential underpinning of the existing economic and monetary union. And European decisions, as has already been mentioned before, need more democratic legitimacy. This is the other side of the coin. These shortcomings, this flaw has clearly been underlined by the German Federal Constitutional Court in its recent verdict on the European Stability Mechanism, ESM, and the Fiscal Compact. By the way, democracy and integration have always been the two fundamental pillars of German European policy. So we want a fundamental reconstruction of the European landscape. And I would like to take this opportunity to highlight some proposals that are part of the current debate. On initiative of German Foreign Minister Guido Westerwelle, 10 European foreign ministers, including France and Austria, met several times as a European future group and prepared a report on how to overcome the crisis in the long run by strengthening the European institutional landscape. Apart from stronger control of national budgets, a more binding economic coordination among member states and the development of the ESM into a European monetary fund, not international but European monetary fund, they developed radical suggestions for greater democratic legitimacy of the European decisions by strengthening the European Parliament and the involvement of national parliaments. For example, creating a permanent joint committee between the European and national parliaments could serve that purpose. Furthermore, they go so far as to propose a directly elected European Commission President, something like a European President, who personally appoints the members of his, quote, European government. Furthermore, a European Parliament with the powers to initiate legislation as well as the creation of a second chamber of member states. We have the European Parliament and we would have a second, like the Senate here. We have the House of Representatives in the United States and we have the Senate. So it will correspond more or less to this model. Creating a second chamber of member states which could be formed by the Council of Ministers. And the creation, for example, of a European border police force. In order to avoid that Europe continues to be a political dwarf and a military worm, as many people say, the ministers want to greatly strengthen the common security and defense policy as well as the External Action Service, which is the European Diplomatic Service. It has been created about 2 years ago, and even the European delegation here in Washington serves now as a kind of embassy, let's say, which has not been the case before. Many of the ideas of the future group could be implemented within the existing framework of the European treaties, but a further development of the Lisbon Treaty would be desirable. Minister Guido Westerwelle goes even further by advocating a European Convention for a European Constitution, would be the next step, which would have to be submitted to the people as a referendum. The report of the 10 ministers will be part of the reform proposals the President of the European Council, Herman van Rompuy, is supposed to present during the next few weeks. As I read yesterday, these proposals have been submitted during the United Nations General Assembly in New York and will be promoted now, I think. Of course, I have to say all these ideas are immature, but they are already on the table. The debate is open. Maybe in the future, let me say, we will achieve in Europe some type of political union the world has never seen before. It could be a confederate state, and at the same time a federal construction, and in some ways a centralized union. For example, if you think of the banking union, this would be part of a centralized institution, or a central finance minister would also be an element of this kind. However, I'm sure that the national identities of all member states would not and should not be put into question by such a European body. And to come to the end of my, I hope not too long statement, I want to say how do I personally see the future of Europe. If you ask me what I think about Europe, somebody who has been a European citizen for his time, for his lifetime, and you always followed the development of the European Union, I'm quite a convinced European, but I see three possibilities. Europe as a whole could happen, makes a great leap forward towards a more integrated union, as I just described. Or Europe continues to muddle through, living from crisis to crisis and developing at different paces, which seems to me the most likely scenario, and this is what you also favored, or what you
don't favor it, but I think that's likely to happen.
Or what you think. I think it's a most pragmatic view of the future of the European Union. Or thirdly, the Eurozone fully splits up, and Europe falls back into to a free trade zone, which would be a loss, I would say, for everybody. To come forward, we have to develop in a certain direction, and we have to go forward, whatever comes out. Thank you very much.